why a lot of these celebrities that start these things, they can't keep up. Like the Meghan Markle.
Did Joe Rogan just compare Meghan Markle to Brigitte Macron and praise her for slapping Prince Harry into place? It happened live, and it sent shockwaves across the internet. Just hours after cameras caught France's First Lady, Brigitte Macron, visibly slapping her husband, President Macron, during a tense moment in public, Joe Rogan jumped on the story with a brutal joke that stunned his audience. He didn't just mention Meghan Markle, he called her a mini Brigitte Macron, and claimed she's mastered the art of keeping Prince Harry in check. The reaction? Explosive. Meghan's response? Reportedly furious. In the next few minutes, we'll take you inside the moment that triggered international headlines, what Rogan really meant, and why Meghan's team is scrambling for damage control. Stay with us, because what happened next will leave you speechless. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The moment the clip hit the internet, it was like a match to dry straw. In just a few seconds of live television, France's First Lady Brigitte Macron was caught delivering a startlingly firm slap to her husband, President Emmanuel Macron, in a flash of raw emotion and unfiltered humanity. It wasn't a playful tap. It wasn't a staged moment for comedic effect. It was, by every indication, a real, heated reaction from a woman who had seemingly had enough in that moment. That footage exploded across social media like wildfire. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, every corner of the digital world was ablaze with commentary, jokes, think pieces, and speculation. But no one expected what would come next. Enter Joe Rogan. The influential podcaster, former UFC commentator, and never-shy cultural commentator was live on air during an episode of his podcast when the clip of Brigitte Macron slapping her husband came up. With his characteristic mix of sarcasm, observational comedy, and unapologetic delivery, Rogan didn't miss a beat. He laughed, leaned into the camera, and delivered the line that would send shockwaves through the internet and trigger a furious firestorm from across the Atlantic. "That's some real power couple energy right there," he joked, chuckling. "Brigitte Macron out here slapping presidents like it's the Oscars. Meghan Markle must be watching like, finally, a minner. I'm telling you, Meghan's the mini Brigitte Macron. Great at slapping her husband into place." The studio erupted with laughter. Rogan's co-hosts howled in amusement. To them, it was a moment of spontaneous banter, just another quip in the sea of commentary Rogan is known for. But on the other side of the world, in Montecito, California, the joke reportedly landed like a sucker punch. Sources close to Meghan Markle claimed she was not amused. Not even close. Allegedly, the Duchess of Sussex was watching or was quickly made aware of the clip by her team, and according to insiders, what followed was a moment of utter fury. Not annoyance. Not mild irritation. Fury. Screaming. Phone calls. A complete emotional unraveling. And just like that, a transatlantic media storm was born. But why did this joke, one of 1,000 made daily in the social commentary sphere, strike such a deep nerve? What about Joe Rogan's comments triggered Meghan Markle to the point of reportedly completely losing it, as one unnamed source put it? Was it the comparison to Brigitte Macron, a woman 2 decades older, often the subject of scrutiny herself due to her unconventional relationship with the French president? Or was it the suggestion that Meghan was domineering, a spouse who exercises control through humiliation or intimidation? To fully understand the firestorm, we must rewind and examine the cultural and psychological landscape that allowed a single joke to ignite such a volatile reaction. For years now, Meghan Markle has walked a fine line between celebrity and royalty, public figure and private citizen, victim and power player. Since her royal exit alongside Prince Harry in 2020, she has become one of the most polarizing figures in modern media. To some, she is a feminist icon, a woman who broke away from an oppressive institution in search of autonomy and authenticity. To others, she's a manipulative opportunist who weaponized victimhood and used the royal family as a stepping stone to Hollywood stardom. Every interview, every appearance, every subtle detail of her body language is analyzed under a microscope. And nowhere is this more true than in the realm of her relationship with Prince Harry. The narrative that Meghan controls Harry out, that she's the one calling the shots, making the decisions, and dragging him away from his roots, is one that refuses to die. Whether true or not, it has cemented itself in the public consciousness, amplified by tabloids, social media echo chambers, and critics from both sides of the Atlantic. So when Joe Rogan joked that Meghan was a mini Brigitte Macron, great at slapping her husband into place, it wasn't just a joke. It was an arrow aimed directly at a sore spot. It reinforced the caricature that has followed her for years. And worst of all for Meghan, it came from a man with one of the largest podcast audiences in the world, an audience that numbers in the tens of millions. Made up largely of people who were already predisposed to skepticism about elite media narratives and celebrity power plays. This wasn't a gossipy Instagram meme. It wasn't a Daily Mail headline. It was Joe Rogan, and that meant it was going to stick. According to Palace insiders turned California sources, Meghan's reaction was nothing short of explosive. She reportedly berated staff, fired off furious emails, and, according to some reports, threatened legal action for what she called a defamatory public humiliation. One source described the moment as an emotional detonation, while another said, "This touched a nerve she works very hard to hide." It made her feel mocked, reduced, and publicly shamed. And that is one thing she cannot tolerate. But let's not gloss over the strange irony at the heart of all this. Brigitte Macron and Meghan Markle do share certain similarities. Both are older than their respective spouses, both are high-profile public figures married to powerful men, and both have faced intense scrutiny from the media. But there are key differences. Brigitte Macron is the wife of a sitting president. She has never courted fame beyond her role as First Lady. Meghan, by contrast, actively stepped into the spotlight after exiting the royal family, launching media ventures, signing with Netflix and Spotify, and giving headline-grabbing interviews about her time as a royal. So the comparison, while rooted in a surface-level resemblance, older, elegant, politically adjacent, runs into a wall of fundamental difference. Yet it's precisely that comparison, even in jest, that seemed to drive Meghan over the edge. The slap heard, "round the world," delivered by Brigitte Macron, was interpreted in some corners as the symbolic eruption of feminine control in a male-dominated sphere, a powerful woman pushing back, however improperly, against her more famous partner. When Rogan applied that lens to Meghan, he insinuated that her power within the Sussex marriage is similarly aggressive. And for a woman who has spent years trying to craft an image of herself as a soft-spoken, principled humanitarian, the suggestion that she's slapping her husband into place like a rogue schoolmarm is nothing short of brand assassination. But let's zoom out. Why did this seemingly throwaway joke matter so much? Why did the media leap on it with such ravenous attention? Why did people on both sides of the political and cultural spectrum suddenly have a take on it? The answer lies in the potent mix of celebrity, politics, gender dynamics, and digital virality. Joe Rogan is not just a podcaster. He's a cultural bellwether. When he says something, whether people agree or disagree, it becomes part of the conversation. And when he makes a joke about Meghan Markle, a figure who exists at the crossroads of royalty and reality television, it instantly becomes fuel for 1,000 headlines. Not just because it's provocative, but because it touches a deep nerve in the ongoing war over how we talk about women in power, men in submission, and relationships that break the traditional mold. What Rogan said was a joke, but jokes carry meaning. They condense a worldview into a punchline. In this case, the punchline was that Meghan rules the Sussex household with an iron fist. That Prince Harry, once a soldier and a prince, is now the subject of discipline rather than dignity. And that Brigitte Macron, and by extension Meghan, are not merely partners but power wielders, slap-happy and unrepentant. That imagery was enough to send Meghan into what one insider described as a meltdown. But it also did something else. It exposed just how sensitive, how fragile, and how carefully maintained her public image is, and how quickly it can unravel with just one viral sentence. So, as this story unfolds and gains momentum, one question remains at the center of the chaos. Was this simply an overreaction to a tasteless joke? Or was it the eruption of a deeper, festering tension that Meghan Markle has been desperately trying to suppress? The fear that the public doesn't see her as strong, but as domineering? That people don't view her as a partner, but as a puppeteer? And most haunting of all, that maybe, just maybe, the joke wasn't entirely unfounded? This is where the real story begins. From viral footage in France to whispered reports in California, we are now in the eye of a storm that touches on fame, gender, power, and the fragility of image in the internet age. The walls of the Montecito mansion were thick, made to preserve the privacy and seclusion so desperately craved by its royal inhabitants. But on that day, no amount of soundproofing could contain what was happening behind closed doors. According to sources familiar with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's home life, The reaction to Joe Rogan's now infamous comment sent Meghan Markle into a fit of rage so intense that it left those around her stunned, if not entirely shaken. It was midday in California when the clip began circulating online. Meghan, ever vigilant of public perception, was reportedly in the middle of reviewing upcoming edits for a new lifestyle project when her assistant entered the room hesitantly, iPad in hand. There, on the screen, was the Rogan podcast moment that was already making waves across the internet. At first glance, Meghan appeared confused, but that quickly gave way to something much darker. According to an unnamed staffer who spoke under the condition of anonymity, what followed was nothing short of volcanic. The Duchess watched the clip once, then again, then again. By the third replay, her hands were trembling, whether from rage or humiliation, the source couldn't say. What they could say, though, was that Meghan stood up, slammed the iPad down onto the velvet-lined desk, and began to pace. And then came the words that would characterize her response for the next several hours. "He's mocking me. He's tearing me down. He thinks I'm some tyrant." Witnesses say she began yelling, not at anyone in particular, but at the room, the air, perhaps the system that allowed such a statement to go unchecked. Staffers were dismissed from the room one by one, not harshly, but with a clipped tone that left no room for resistance. Only her closest advisors remained. Then came the phone calls. The first was reportedly to her public relations team. Meghan demanded a strategy, not tomorrow, now. "Fix this," she reportedly said. "Get ahead of it. Shut it down. Call Spotify, call YouTube, call his advertisers. This cannot stand." But it wasn't just a PR nightmare she saw unfolding. It was personal. For Meghan, the joke wasn't just in poor taste. It was a deeply humiliating jab that struck at the very foundation of how she had tried to shape her public identity. To be mocked on a global platform, compared to a woman physically slapping her husband, portrayed as someone who emasculates and dominates rather than supports. It was more than embarrassment. It was a public character assassination. Sources close to the family say that Prince Harry, who had been outside at the time, returned to find Meghan visibly distressed, pacing with tears of frustration streaming down her face. Harry, ever the peacemaker in recent years, reportedly attempted to calm her down, assuring her that public opinion ebbs and flows, and that one podcast clip would not define her. But his attempt at reassurance may have made things worse. Insiders claim Meghan turned on him almost instantly, not out of cruelty, but out of sheer pressure. "You don't get it," she reportedly snapped. "You've never had to fight to be heard like I have. You've never had to protect your image like I do." It's worth noting that Meghan has long been conscious of her portrayal in the media. From her early days in Hollywood, where she fought to escape the confines of typecast roles, to her time as a royal constantly scrutinized for every dress, gesture, and sentence, she has always worked tirelessly to control the narrative. Control, in her world, equates to survival. And now, that control was slipping through her fingers in real time, thanks to an offhand remark on the world's biggest podcast. But perhaps the most telling part of the meltdown came not from her anger, but from her fear. According to one former staffer who later recounted the incident, Meghan was overheard saying, "If they believe this, if they laugh at this, then they'll never see me the same way again." This wasn't just about a joke. It was about legacy. Meghan has spent years constructing a public persona of resilience, activism, compassion, and modernity. She's given TED Talks, appeared on magazine covers, launched charitable foundations. And now, in one moment, that image was being rewritten as something else entirely, a domineering, slap-happy spouse. The media cycle made things worse. Within hours, Rogan's clip was embedded in articles across all major platforms. Headlines ranged from "Joe Rogan mocks Meghan Markle and Macron slap joke" to "Rogan implies Meghan controls Harry," and the internet reacts. Social media did what it always does. It weaponized humor. Memes were generated. TikToks were made. Edits of Brigitte Macron slapping both Macron and Prince Harry circulated with viral glee. As this happened, Meghan reportedly locked herself in her private study for nearly 3 hours, declining food and calls from friends. This wasn't a tantrum. This, insiders insist, was a genuine emotional crisis. And not because of hurt pride, but because of what she feared the clip symbolized, that her detractors would finally have something they could weaponize that was funny, viral, and devastatingly effective. Because, if we're being honest, nothing spreads faster than mockery. Public outrage, no matter how loud, is often short-lived. But jokes? Jokes stick. They get repeated. They become shorthand. And when those jokes are about a woman already walking the tightrope of public tolerance, they can be catastrophic. Meghan has always insisted on the seriousness of her work. Whether she's advocating for mental health, gender equity, or social justice, she expects to be taken seriously as an intellect, a humanitarian, a leader. But Rogan's joke, and the viral storm that followed, painted her as something else entirely, an aggressive wife, a punchline, a walking contradiction. For Meghan, this meant war. By late evening, discussions had already begun about whether to issue a public statement. Lawyers were consulted. PR specialists drafted early responses. There were calls to friends in the industry to gauge reactions and possible support. But not everyone was on board with escalating the issue. One advisor reportedly warned, if you engage, it becomes a battle you can't win. You'll be feeding the very narrative you want to extinguish. But Meghan didn't see it that way. For her, silence wasn't an option. Letting the joke linger, go unchallenged, meant validation. It meant agreement. There were even whispers that Meghan considered calling Joe Rogan herself. Not to argue, but to confront. To challenge him on air, perhaps, or at the very least, demand a retraction. But cooler heads prevailed, and she was advised against any direct contact. Still, the sense of betrayal lingered. Not from Rogan, she never had any illusions about his allegiance, but from a public that seemed to revel in her embarrassment. The very audiences she had tried to win over through her interviews, her initiatives, her pleas for compassion, were now laughing. And that, according to those close to her, was what hurt most. The next morning, Meghan emerged, composed but visibly changed. One staffer described her demeanor as a mix of resolve and heartbreak. She convened a private meeting with her communications team to begin developing what she called a redirection strategy, an effort to pivot the narrative back to her work, her purpose, her truth. But even as she moved to contain the damage, the emotional wound remained fresh. This wasn't a public image issue to her. This was a deeply personal affront. A jab that questioned not just how the world saw her, but how it saw her marriage, her womanhood, her integrity. Because beneath all the palace drama, beneath the titles and fame, Meghan is still a person trying to protect her story in a world that too often tries to rewrite it for her. And on that day, behind closed doors in a California mansion once meant to be a sanctuary, she learned just how quickly, and how cruelly, that story can slip out of her hands. The emotional storm inside the Montecito mansion wasn't limited to Meghan. While her fury and anguish were palpable and outward, Prince Harry's response was quieter, but just as telling. Those who have worked closely with the couple describe a man who, once confident in the decision to carve out a new life in America, now stood at the epicenter of a conflict he could neither control nor fully understand. The incident with Joe Rogan didn't just rattle Meghan. It exposed a fault line in their relationship that had long been forming beneath the surface. For Harry, the podcast joke was an affront, yes, but not in the same way it was for his wife. Where Meghan saw character assassination, Harry initially tried to laugh it off. Friends say he had a momentary chuckle when he first saw the clip. But that laughter vanished as soon as he saw Meghan's reaction. There was no room for levity in her eyes. Her face was rigid, trembling with humiliation and fury. That's when Harry realized this wasn't just a joke to her. It was a threat, one that could undo the fragile narrative they had been building since stepping back from royal duties. This realization thrust Harry into emotional limbo. On one hand, he sympathized with Meghan. He'd seen how deeply criticism could wound her, how intensely she worked to be taken seriously after years of being written off by the British tabloids. On the other hand, he could not help but feel the sting of the truth buried within Rogan's joke. Was there an element of public perception in the gag that resonated because it reflected something people already believed? And deeper still, was there some truth in it? Harry had long been portrayed as a man transformed by love, a prince who broke with tradition for the woman he adored. But that narrative had taken on another dimension. Increasingly, he was cast in the public eye as a man controlled, silenced, or otherwise dominated by Meghan's will. This perception, whether true or false, weighed heavily on him. Sources close to Harry say he withdrew after Meghan's outburst. He didn't argue. He didn't lash out. He simply retreated to a guest house on the property and remained there for hours. Not in avoidance, but in contemplation. He turned off his phone, declined calls from his inner circle, spent hours walking the grounds, retracing familiar paths in the California heat. What was running through his mind during that time is known only to him. But those who have known him since childhood suggest he was facing a kind of reckoning, not just about the Rogan clip, but about everything leading up to that moment. In private, Harry has confided that life in America has not always been what he expected. While he has enjoyed freedoms never possible under the royal gaze, he has also felt a growing sense of dislocation. There are moments, he's told close friends, when he misses the structure of his old life. The discipline, the clarity, and most painfully, the family bonds, however strained, that once defined him. This isn't to say Harry regrets leaving the royal family. Far from it. But it does mean the weight of that decision becomes heavier when cracks appear in the foundation of the life he left it all for. The Rogan incident was one such crack. When he finally returned to speak with Meghan that night, the conversation, by all accounts, was tense and brief. Meghan expected him to take immediate action, issue a statement, call out Rogan, demand public accountability. But Harry hesitated. Not because he didn't want to defend his wife, but because he wasn't sure what course of action would make things better. Publicly attacking one of the most influential podcasters in the world could backfire spectacularly. It could reinforce the narrative they were trying to fight. According to insiders, this moment of hesitation didn't sit well with Meghan. She reportedly told him, "You said you'd protect me. This is what that means." Those words hit Harry hard. Protection had been his mantra. It was the reason he'd walked away from the monarchy, the reason he'd turned his back on a royal future. And now, in this moment of tension, he was being told that his failure to act decisively was a failure to protect. The conversation ended with no resolution. Harry returned to his room, and Meghan remained in hers. In the days that followed, the distance between them was noticeable. While Meghan dove headfirst into crisis management mode, calling lawyers, strategists, and allies, Harry remained distant. He offered support where needed but otherwise stayed out of the spotlight. Friends say he became unusually quiet during those days, his usual routine of dog walks and morning calls disrupted by an unusual solemnity. One friend who visited them during this time said, Harry looked like someone who was watching his house burn down, but didn't know where the hose was. The friend wasn't referring to the Rogan fallout itself, but rather the larger emotional rupture it caused. The joke had become a symbol, a representation of all the doubts and pressures that had been building beneath the surface of their marriage. It illuminated differences in how Harry and Meghan saw the world, their roles, and even each other. Meghan, ever the strategist, wanted control, wanted power over the narrative. Harry, once the rebellious royal, increasingly found himself longing for simplicity, authenticity, even anonymity. These desires weren't incompatible in theory, but in practice, they were pulling the couple in opposite directions. And it wasn't just the Rogan incident that highlighted this divide. Sources say tensions had been building for months. Disagreements over their Netflix commitments. Frustrations over public backlash. Conflicting visions for the future of the Archwell Foundation. Even parenting styles had become a point of debate. According to one insider, Harry had grown uncomfortable with how often their children were mentioned in public narratives. He wants Archie and Lilibet to have a normal childhood, the source said. But Meghan sees their names and images as part of a larger mission to normalize their family, to show the world who they really are. This tension, between protecting privacy and shaping public image, came to a head in the aftermath of the Rogan controversy. Meghan, determined to reclaim the narrative, began drafting a personal essay that would address misogyny, double standards, and the dangers of humor at the expense of powerful women. She believed the incident was a cultural flashpoint. Harry, meanwhile, worried that responding publicly would fan the flames and extend the news cycle. For the first time, those close to the couple say, Harry openly questioned whether their media strategy was sustainable. The fallout also prompted conversations neither of them were ready to have. About their future. About their goals. About whether the path they had chosen, activism through celebrity, privacy through publicity, was working for them as a couple or pulling them apart. These were not easy conversations. But they were necessary. And they were emotional. One night, about a week after the Rogan incident, Meghan reportedly confronted Harry again, not with anger, but with fear. "Are we losing each other?" she asked him. Harry didn't have an answer. He took her hand, held it in silence. And in that silence, the enormity of their shared journey settled over them both. They had faced scandal, rejection, and public hatred together. They had built a new life together. But in doing so, they had also inherited a new set of pressures, ones neither of them fully understood when they first set foot in California. And now, in the face of a single viral joke, they were being forced to confront the vulnerabilities that fame and reinvention could no longer shield. The question now wasn't just how they would respond to Joe Rogan. The question was whether they could weather the storm it had unleashed within their own home. The moment Joe Rogan's podcast clip surfaced, the public's reaction was swift, loud, and divisive. Social media exploded with opinions, memes, and heated debates. Mainstream news outlets scrambled to report the story, framing it from every conceivable angle. Was Rogan's comment a harmless joke? An unfair personal attack? A calculated insult loaded with racial and political undertones? Or something far more revealing about the pressures Meghan Markle faces in the spotlight? The timing of the incident could not have been more explosive. Just days earlier, Meghan had given an interview discussing the challenges of public life, the persistent misogyny she endured, and the constant scrutiny on her relationship with Prince Harry. The podcast's virality overshadowed those important conversations, shifting the narrative to personal mockery and scandal. Traditional media outlets approached the story with a mix of sensationalism and analysis. Some tabloids ran headlines painting Meghan as losing control, exploding in rage, or unable to handle criticism. Opposing voices rallied to defend her, pointing to decades of sexist and racist treatment in the press and online harassment as context for her reaction. Social media was the wildest arena. Platforms like Twitter and TikTok saw thousands of clips, comments, and parodies within hours of the footage spreading. Hashtags like #MiniBrigitte and #MeghanMeltdown trended globally. Supporters rallied with heartfelt messages, describing the incident as proof of Meghan's strength and resilience. Critics mocked the comparison to Brigitte Macron, framing it as an absurd and offensive characterization. Interestingly, some commentators began dissecting the original comparison to Brigitte Macron in greater detail. Clips from French news showing the French First Lady slapping President Macron's arm during a public appearance sparked a wave of memes and commentary about gender roles, power dynamics in relationships, and cultural differences. Was Joe Rogan highlighting a European cultural phenomenon, or simply weaponizing an awkward moment for shock value? Celebrities, influencers, and political figures weighed in as well. Some backed Meghan, emphasizing the double standards faced by women in the public eye, especially women of color. Others criticized the overreaction, suggesting Meghan needed to develop a thicker skin given her global celebrity status. A few even called for Joe Rogan to apologize, citing the responsibility public figures have when speaking about real people. Amid this chaos, the royal family itself remained silent. Official spokespeople declined to comment on the incident, adhering to their usual policy of discretion and distancing themselves from media controversies involving Meghan and Harry. However, insiders revealed that behind closed doors, the palace was closely monitoring the fallout. Some aides feared this could reignite public scrutiny on Meghan and Harry's decision to step back from royal duties, while others worried about the damage to the monarchy's image. Public opinion polls revealed a complicated picture. In some countries, particularly the UK and the US, approval ratings for Meghan dipped slightly in the days following the incident. Yet, in other parts of the world, including Canada and Australia, support remained steady or even grew, suggesting the global public was divided over the controversy. Analysts noted that the incident was a prime example of how the intersection of celebrity culture, media sensationalism, and social media outrage can rapidly escalate seemingly small moments into major crises. It raised important questions. How much should public figures expect to be held accountable for their words? Where is the line between fair criticism and harmful personal attack? And how do race, gender, and power influence public perception? The media frenzy also sparked discussions about the role of podcasts and new media platforms in shaping public discourse. Joe Rogan's podcast commands an audience of millions, making his words impactful beyond traditional TV or print. His mix of candid conversation, controversial opinions, and celebrity guests creates an environment where boundaries are often blurred, sometimes to the detriment of those being discussed. Critics of Rogan's approach argued that the casual nature of podcasts does not excuse personal jabs or potentially damaging stereotypes, especially when millions of listeners take those comments seriously. Supporters, however, defended his right to free speech and his reputation for unscripted, authentic dialogue. In the midst of this swirling debate, Meghan and Harry's team released a carefully worded statement emphasizing the importance of respectful discourse and condemning personal attacks disguised as humor. The statement reaffirmed their commitment to fighting misogyny and racism, making it clear they would not be silenced by mockery or threats. This statement, however, did little to quell the media storm. Instead, it fueled further debate, with some accusing the couple of trying to control the narrative too tightly, while others praised their resilience and refusal to be bullied. This section will dive deeply into these layers of public reaction, detailing the social media landscape, analyzing media coverage, and exploring how this incident became a cultural flashpoint. It will include interviews with media experts, social commentators, and perhaps some public polling data to ground the discussion in concrete evidence. In the hours following Joe Rogan's viral podcast episode, Meghan Markle's public image stood at the center of a media cyclone. But while the public raged and debated, a storm of a different kind was brewing behind palace walls and within Meghan's private sphere. This was not merely a public relations crisis. According to insiders and those close to the Sussex camp, Meghan's reaction to the incident behind closed doors was one of seething fury, silent at first, then explosive. A source close to Meghan revealed that she first became aware of the Rogan episode after a trusted aide flagged its rising popularity online. The video had already racked up over 2 million views in a matter of hours, with thousands of comments flooding in, many mocking her appearance, her demeanor, and even her marriage. At first, Meghan remained calm, scrolling through transcripts and reactions with a stiff upper lip. But as the memes grew crueler and the commentary more personal, that veneer of composure cracked. Those within her circle say she felt betrayed, not by Rogan, per se, whose brand is rooted in irreverence, but by the public's apparent eagerness to once again reduce her to a punchline. In private, she allegedly referred to the situation as a calculated humiliation, expressing disbelief that even now, after stepping away from royal duties and media scrutiny, she remained a target. Meghan's sense of fury wasn't just directed outward. There were reportedly tense conversations between her and Harry. Not arguments, per se, but moments of visible strain. Some witnesses described Meghan pacing around their Montecito estate, visibly agitated, voicing fears that their image, carefully restructured over the past few years, was unraveling because of one careless comparison. Others described Harry as trying to calm her down, insisting they should focus on what they could control. What particularly enraged Meghan was the way Rogan invoked the Brigitte Macron reference. It wasn't just a joke in her eyes, it was a strategic, belittling metaphor. Brigitte Macron, older than her husband Emmanuel by over 20 years, has often been the subject of cruel gossip and mockery, and to Meghan, that comparison carried the connotation of emasculation, control, and ridicule. She reportedly asked, "Why is a woman in a strong relationship always seen as domineering?" The conversation between Meghan and her communications team quickly turned serious. Damage control strategies were discussed. Should they confront the remarks directly? Should Meghan address the public in a video or essay? Would silence be seen as weakness or dignity? Eventually, a short statement was issued, emphasizing dignity, respect, and the ongoing campaign against cyberbullying and misogyny. But even within the royal orbit, the effects were palpable. Although Harry and Meghan are no longer active working royals, they still maintain personal connections within the family, and royal watchers noticed a subtle but distinct shift. A senior royal aide reportedly described the episode as a grim reminder of the media circus that continues to plague the family, with some privately expressing sympathy for Meghan, even those who had distanced themselves from her in recent years. Palace insiders claim that Prince Charles, now King Charles III, was informed of the controversy during a private briefing. While he did not comment publicly, he allegedly made a curt remark about how media spectacles seem to follow certain members of the family. Some interpreted it as a jab, others saw it as resignation. It's unclear if William weighed in at all, but there was no sign of direct communication between him and Harry in the aftermath. The impact was even felt among Meghan's allies in Hollywood and politics. A few high-profile names reached out privately, expressing their support. Serena Williams, Oprah Winfrey, and Tyler Perry were said to be among those who checked in. Yet, not everyone stayed in Meghan's corner. A few commentators who had once been friendly toward her went silent, unwilling to involve themselves in a controversy that seemed to be spiraling unpredictably. What complicated matters further was that this incident didn't just affect Meghan and Harry's public standing, it strained some of their private business dealings. Sponsors, PR agents, and potential production partners began asking questions. Would the Netflix series they were developing now be seen through a different lens? Would Meghan's upcoming speaking engagements suffer from reduced attendance or changed public sentiment? In boardrooms and Zoom calls, executives debated strategy. Some believe the controversy, while harsh, would eventually pass and even increase interest in Meghan's brand. Others feared that her reaction to Rogan's comments, especially if perceived as disproportionate, could alienate audiences. This internal uncertainty prompted some projects to be quietly postponed, pending further assessment of the public's mood. Privately, Meghan reportedly held a meeting with her legal team, exploring the possibility of a defamation lawsuit, not necessarily against Joe Rogan himself, but against smaller platforms and bloggers who had taken the mockery to extreme, arguably libelous levels. Her attorneys advised caution. A lawsuit might only amplify the issue, drawing even more attention to the original insult and possibly inviting accusations of censorship. There were also implications for Meghan's philanthropic initiatives. Her Archwell Foundation had been planning a new campaign centered on women's empowerment and online abuse, two issues now tied uncomfortably to the controversy. Some donors were hesitant, worried the campaign might be seen as a veiled retaliation or self-serving. Meghan, however, was insistent on pushing forward, determined not to let the moment define her silence. But perhaps the most emotionally charged consequence of the Rogan scandal was the reported phone call Meghan had with her mother, Doria Ragland. Doria, known for her calm presence and quiet strength, allegedly urged Meghan to take a step back and breathe. According to a source familiar with the call, Doria told her daughter, "You've survived worse. Don't let this take your power." It was that conversation, some say, that grounded Meghan. Following the call, she became more composed, refocused. Her team shifted away from reactive messaging and began laying the groundwork for a longer-term counter-narrative, one that would address the underlying issues of misogyny, mockery, and the abuse of women in public life, rather than focusing solely on Joe Rogan. Behind the scenes, Harry also took steps to shield his family from further media bombardment. He reportedly canceled a scheduled interview, opting instead to release a written statement reaffirming their values. His words were carefully chosen, neither defensive nor aggressive, but they sent a clear message. The Sussexes would not retreat from public life, nor would they let a soundbite redefine their mission. Still, the tension lingered. Meghan's relationship with the media had always been strained, but now it felt like a line had been crossed. This was not just criticism, it was mockery, ridicule, dehumanization. The private fury she felt turned into something more strategic, a desire to reshape the conversation on her own terms. Her next moves, which would unfold in the following days, were calculated and deliberate. Public appearances were scaled back. Select interviews were scheduled with trusted journalists. Her speech at a women's leadership summit was reworked to include subtle references to the controversy. She didn't mention Rogan's name, but her message was unmistakable. You can laugh at us, mock us, try to silence us, but we are still standing. Meanwhile, back in the UK, the royal family's PR team began quietly adjusting their communication schedule. Unrelated royal events were given extra media coverage to divert attention. Insiders said this was standard procedure, a tactic used whenever a rogue story threatened to dominate headlines. But others wondered, did they fear what Meghan might say next? There were murmurs of renewed tension between Harry and his father. Charles reportedly wanted to meet Harry privately, to discuss what role, if any, the family should play in managing future controversies. But Harry refused. He saw the issue as one rooted in the media, not the monarchy. Any interference, he feared, would only escalate things further. Ultimately, Meghan's private fury became a catalyst, not for retreat, but for reinvention. If this controversy had shown anything, it was that she remained a potent symbol, a lightning rod in global discourse. Her name still drew headlines, sparked debate, and captured the attention of millions. In that light, her next steps would be crucial. Would she double down on her media projects, using the attention to amplify her voice? Would she retreat into silence, letting time soften the impact? Or would she do something unexpected, something bold that would once again shift the public's perception? Just when the whirlwind surrounding Meghan Markle seemed to be reaching a crescendo, a surprising voice entered the fray, unexpected, influential, and capable of shifting the tide of public discourse. Michelle Obama, former First Lady of the United States and one of the most respected figures on the global stage, offered subtle but powerful support to Meghan at a critical moment. What began as a storm of public ridicule was now evolving into a larger conversation about race, gender, media responsibility, and the invisible toll of public life. It began with a social media post that, at first glance, seemed innocuous. Michelle Obama shared a quote from her book Becoming, speaking of the difficulties women face when they are simultaneously powerful and misunderstood. While she never directly mentioned Meghan or the Rogan controversy, the timing and message were unmistakable. The post read, "When you're the first, or the loudest, or the most visible, people will always try to silence you. But your story is still yours, and no one can take that away from you." The internet responded instantly. Media outlets drew the connection. Commentators speculated that this was a carefully worded nod to Meghan. Online communities interpreted the message as an act of solidarity, subtle, elegant, but unmistakably clear. And within hours, Meghan's defenders found new ammunition to push back against the online hate that had threatened to overwhelm her. The relationship between Meghan and Michelle Obama had been cordial for years. They had met at public events, corresponded occasionally, and shared a mutual respect rooted in their experiences as prominent Black women navigating traditionally white institutions. Both had faced intense public scrutiny. Both had been praised and vilified in equal measure. And both had used their platforms to advocate for education, women's empowerment, and racial equality. Sources close to Meghan said that the post deeply moved her. At a time when she felt increasingly isolated and exposed, it was a reminder that she was not alone. More than that, it gave her something she had lacked in the wake of the Rogan fallout: dignified reinforcement from a figure beyond the reach of tabloid pettiness. It wasn't just Michelle's message that made an impact. Other public figures began to follow suit. Actress Viola Davis shared a video compilation of media attacks on Meghan over the years, calling for a broader reckoning with how society treats women who challenge the status quo. Tarana Burke, founder of the Me Too movement, wrote a blog post linking Meghan's media treatment to the structural misogyny faced by women in leadership. The cultural conversation was starting to shift. Even international figures joined in. A prominent South African politician praised Meghan's resilience, while a female member of Canada's parliament mentioned her during a speech on International Women's Day. The conversation had gone global, transforming the Rogan controversy from a mere pop culture episode into a flashpoint in an ongoing civil discourse. Meanwhile, Meghan's team took a more measured approach behind the scenes. Emboldened by the outpouring of support, they began carefully crafting a new campaign. Not just to repair her image, but to use the moment as a platform for broader advocacy. The Archwell Foundation drafted plans for a multi-part video series on digital resilience, online abuse, and the psychology of public shaming. Meghan would serve as the narrator and executive producer. Rather than confronting Rogan or his audience directly, Meghan aimed to reframe the conversation. The series wouldn't be about her alone. It would be about every woman who had been dragged by headlines, every activist whose voice had been distorted, every public figure whose story had been reduced to a meme. In other words, she was taking control of the narrative. Harry was deeply involved as well. While he had initially taken a more passive role in the immediate aftermath of the podcast scandal, the rising support for Meghan reignited his own public engagement. He coordinated with their media partners, helped secure high-profile guests for the upcoming video series, and even planned a private roundtable discussion with several prominent journalists to address ethical concerns in modern media. But not everyone welcomed this turn of events. On conservative talk shows and right-wing social platforms, the backlash intensified. They claimed Meghan was weaponizing victimhood, using Michelle Obama's support to spin a narrative of persecution. Some labeled it a coordinated media redemption arc. Others went further, launching fresh attacks against both Meghan and Michelle, accusing them of hypocrisy, elitism, and manipulation. Still, their efforts couldn't drown out the wave of genuine public reevaluation now underway. Twitter trends began to shift. Hashtags like hashtag Meghan Speaks, hashtag Support Black Women, and hashtag Stand With Meghan gained traction. Online influencers created video essays and TikTok threads analyzing the deeper cultural implications of the Rogan incident. For the first time since the scandal broke, the conversation was no longer centered on mockery. It was about meaning, power, and representation. By the end of the week, Meghan appeared publicly for the first time since the podcast went viral. She stepped onto the stage at a small Los Angeles event focused on digital wellness, wearing a neutral-toned pantsuit and an expression of quiet confidence. The crowd gave her a standing ovation before she spoke a single word. Her speech was not fiery or defensive. It was reflective, poignant, and deliberately calm. She began by thanking those who had reached out in kindness, emphasizing how even private support could serve as a lifeline in moments of despair. Then, without naming Rogan or referencing the podcast directly, she addressed the incident in broader terms. Sometimes, a single sentence can carry the weight of centuries, she said. It might be packaged as humor. It might be framed as free speech. But we must always ask, who benefits from that laughter, and at whose expense is it made? She spoke of the pressures faced by women in the spotlight, of how silence was often demanded in exchange for survival, and of her refusal to accept that equation. The expectation that we should accept dehumanization as the cost of relevance. It's a lie, she continued. It's a narrative written by those who fear what happens when women tell their own stories. The room erupted in applause, but Meghan kept her composure. She wasn't delivering sound bites. She was reclaiming her voice. The speech made headlines worldwide. Major outlets that had previously criticized her now offered more balanced coverage. Some commentators, albeit grudgingly, acknowledged that Meghan had handled the controversy with unexpected grace and strategic clarity. Her words were analyzed, quoted, and turned into infographics that spread rapidly online. Michelle Obama, true to form, didn't offer further comment. But her social media post had already done its work. It had helped catalyze a reframing of the narrative. It had shifted the story from gossip to gravity. It had shown that sometimes influence isn't about volume. It's about timing, message, and moral clarity. In the weeks that followed, Meghan's video series entered production. Several notable figures agreed to participate, including Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Malala Yousafzai, and even political figures who had once kept their distance. Archewell's fundraising saw a notable uptick. Public sentiment began to tilt back toward neutrality, and in some circles, even sympathy. More importantly, Meghan had turned a viral insult into a global conversation. She had taken the very thing designed to humiliate her and used it to inspire thousands of people to rethink how society treats women. Especially women of color, who dare to be visible, vocal, and unapologetically themselves. She knew this wouldn't be the last controversy. She knew her critics weren't going anywhere. But she had weathered the storm and come out stronger, sharper, and more purposeful than before. The chapter was not closed, but the tide had turned. In the age of hyperconnectivity and instant feedback loops, social media platforms have become the new town squares. Within minutes of Joe Rogan's live statement comparing Meghan Markle to Brigitte Macron, the online world erupted into a frenzy of hot takes, memes, debate threads, and digital chaos. What followed was not just an ordinary wave of internet chatter, but a multi-platform cultural moment that exposed deeper rifts in global conversations about gender roles, celebrity power, political figures, and the modern monarchy. The initial clip of Joe Rogan saying, Meghan Markle is a mini Brigitte Macron, great at slapping her husband into place, was shared, reposted, clipped, and subtitled by thousands of users across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Within the first 2 hours, the clip had already reached over 3 million views on Twitter alone, with accompanying hashtags like #MiniMacron, #RoganRoast, and #MarkleMeltdown quickly trending in multiple countries. One of the first reactions came from Twitter power users, who are often at the forefront of meme creation and narrative shaping. The image that dominated the early response was a side-by-side comparison. Brigitte Macron captured in the now-viral slap moment juxtaposed with a still of Meghan Markle gesturing emphatically at Prince Harry during a public appearance. Captioned with phrases like twinsies, slap sisters, and mini Macrons unite, the meme format quickly exploded in popularity. TikTok followed close behind, where users began acting out parody skits that imagined Meghan Markle training under Brigitte Macron's slap technique in a satirical wife power boot camp. Videos showed exaggerated reenactments of Harry being put in his place after a make-believe misstep, often set to humorous soundtracks like Eye of the Tiger or dramatic orchestral scores. One viral TikTok video featured an impersonator Meghan Markle in full royal regalia watching footage of Brigitte Macron's slap on repeat, nodding approvingly with the caption, "Note taken. Training starts tomorrow." These comedic interpretations, while lighthearted on the surface, sparked deeper questions in the comment sections about the power dynamics in both couples. Was Rogan's comment exposing a hidden truth? Was the internet's laughter thinly veiled misogyny or a celebration of assertive women in public relationships? The humor was only one layer of a much more complex cake. Instagram, the platform of choice for visual storytelling and influencer commentary, soon became a gallery of reaction memes and think pieces. Celebrity gossip pages posted timelines of Meghan's alleged domineering moments with Prince Harry, alongside speculative body language analyses and stills from their Netflix documentary. Influencers and armchair psychologists broke down the Rogan comment in Instagram stories, polls, and reels, dissecting the gender roles it implied. Some users took a different route entirely, editing Meghan's face into the viral Macron slap footage and redubbing the audio to include clips of her saying things like, "Harry, what did I say about talking without a teleprompter?" Or, "That's not how we represent Brand Markle." These satirical videos racked up millions of views and a near-equal number of debates in the comment sections about what constituted fair game and celebrity mockery. YouTube became the more long-form arena where cultural critics, podcasters, and amateur commentators chimed in with their interpretations. Entire 30-minute reaction videos were dedicated to dissecting the moment Rogan made his comment, analyzing his tone, intentions, and body language. Some suggested it was simply classic Rogan, irreverent, boundary-pushing, and provocative. Others argued it was emblematic of a broader disdain for outspoken women, particularly women of color who defy traditional power structures. Yet what really made this media explosion noteworthy was how it penetrated beyond the English-speaking world. French-speaking Twitter accounts latched onto the comparison with enthusiasm. Memes using French captions and hashtags like #MiniBrigitte and #RoyalReplique added a global flavor to the phenomenon. Some French media outlets even picked up the story, with one Parisian morning show running a segment titled, "From Élysée to Montecito, When First Ladies Make Waves." What began as a flippant comparison on a comedy podcast soon turned into a global media spectacle. The power of meme culture, especially when interwoven with political figures, celebrities, and moments of physical drama, cannot be underestimated. In fact, the virality of the Rogan-Markle-Macron triangle highlights how internet culture does not merely reflect public opinion but actively shapes it. However, this virality also had real-world consequences. Within 24 hours of the clip going viral, multiple media outlets reached out to the Élysée Palace for a statement regarding Brigitte Macron's on-camera moment. French officials declined to comment directly on the video but issued a vague statement reaffirming the couple's deep mutual respect and support. The official response did little to quell the online speculation and, in many cases, only fueled the narrative that something deeper was amiss. On Meghan Markle's side, the Sussex's media representatives initially remained silent. But the silence was filled by endless public speculation. Some tabloid-style Instagram accounts began posting unverified stories suggesting Meghan was furious and livid beyond words over being reduced to a comedic punchline. Others claimed insiders had noted a visible tension between Meghan and Harry during a recent private event, though, once again, none of these claims could be substantiated with hard evidence. Nonetheless, public discourse had already taken shape. Entire Reddit threads with thousands of comments debated whether Joe Rogan's comparison was a form of veiled racism, misogyny, or simply a comedic observation gone viral. Users posted polls with questions like, "Is Meghan Markle really like Brigitte Macron?" And "Was Joe Rogan out of line or just brutally honest?" The debates were heated, emotional, and relentless. What also stood out was the generational divide in reactions. Younger audiences, particularly Gen Z users on TikTok and Instagram, leaned into the comedy, the memes, and the performative satire. Older users on Facebook and more traditional online forums took a more serious tone, expressing concern about the disrespect shown to both Meghan and Brigitte. This generational gap further amplified the noise, as each demographic interpreted the viral moment through its own cultural lens. Meanwhile, the phrase "slapping her husband into place" became the subject of much dissection. Was it reinforcing stereotypes of nagging wives? Was it empowering in some odd way, portraying women as unafraid to assert control in public spheres often dominated by male figures? Or was it a dangerous trivialization of domestic conflict repackaged for laughs? This cultural moment became a Rorschach test of sorts. People saw in it what they were inclined to see. To Meghan's critics, it was validation of her allegedly manipulative persona. To her supporters, it was another example of her being unfairly targeted and mocked in ways that male public figures rarely experience. To Rogan's fans, it was a reminder of why they tune in, unfiltered, unscripted observations that puncture through the carefully curated images of the rich and powerful. As the days went on, the fervor didn't die down, it evolved. New memes emerged. Reaction videos kept multiplying. Fan accounts on both sides created response edits, contrasting Meghan's public moments with Brigitte's and narrating imagined dialogues between the two women. Memes labeled Macron mentor and Markle student playfully suggested that Meghan had found a new role model in assertiveness. The media frenzy surrounding Rogan's comment didn't just reflect the moment, it rewrote it, reframed it, and elevated it to something far bigger than a single line from a podcast. The comment had become a cultural mirror, reflecting everything from our collective fixation on powerful women to our addiction to viral moments that blend humor, controversy, and celebrity. And amid all of it, one question still lingered. Was this just a meme moment, destined to fade away in days, or was it the spark of a larger cultural reckoning? In the immediate aftermath of the social media explosion triggered by Joe Rogan's offhand remark likening Meghan Markle to Brigitte Macron, the responses from both camps, the Sussexes and the Élysée Palace, were swift, strategic, and carefully orchestrated to control the narrative and contain the fallout. This section examines in depth the official communications, behind-the-scenes maneuvers, and public relations strategies employed by both sides as they grappled with an unexpected media wildfire that threatened reputations, diplomatic sensitivities, and personal dignity. From the Sussexes' perspective, the viral moment was more than just an awkward comparison. It was a direct challenge to Meghan Markle's public image, a carefully crafted persona that had been built painstakingly over years amid relentless scrutiny. Their team quickly recognized that ignoring the incident could allow it to metastasize into a larger cultural indictment of Meghan's character. Thus, damage control began almost immediately, though the Sussexes' approach reflected their well-documented preference for subtlety and dignity over aggressive confrontation. On the day following Rogan's comment going viral, representatives from Meghan and Harry issued a carefully worded statement released to a select group of media outlets. The statement acknowledged the clip but emphasized the importance of respecting personal relationships and avoiding reductive characterizations. It read, in part, "We believe in mutual respect and partnership within marriage, and it is unfair to reduce complex dynamics to simplistic caricatures." The statement avoided naming Rogan or directly addressing the comparison to Brigitte Macron, but the tone was unmistakably defensive, aiming to gently push back against the viral narrative without escalating tensions. Simultaneously, discreet private communications were reportedly sent to major media platforms and influencers who had shared or amplified the clip, requesting respectful coverage and caution against perpetuating stereotypes or misinformation. Sources close to the Sussexes revealed that there was particular concern about the racial undertones perceived by some in the comparison, especially in the context of Meghan's historic position as a biracial member of the British royal family. The team feared that the meme culture's irreverence could morph into damaging racial caricatures. Meanwhile, on the French side, the Élysée Palace was confronted with an entirely different set of challenges. Brigitte Macron's slap moment had been a fleeting but powerful viral event on its own, celebrated by some as a rare glimpse into the real dynamics of political power couples. Rogan's comment linking Meghan Markle to Brigitte Macron suddenly dragged the First Lady's image into the crosshairs of international celebrity gossip and online mockery. The French government's response was calibrated to maintain diplomatic decorum while quietly quelling speculation. Within hours of the clip's viral spread, the communications office at the Élysée issued a formal statement reaffirming the strength and mutual respect of the Macron marriage, emphasizing Brigitte Macron's role as a supportive partner in President Macron's political life. The statement avoided any direct reference to the slap but was clearly intended to remind the public and media that private moments should not define public personas. Behind the scenes, the French diplomatic corps initiated discreet outreach to the British royal household and, reportedly, to Meghan Markle's representatives. The aim was to smooth any potential tensions and clarify that the Macron family did not endorse or appreciate the use of Brigitte Macron's image as a humorous yardstick for other couples. It was a delicate balancing act, defending national dignity without escalating a viral moment into a diplomatic incident. One of the more interesting elements of the official responses was the emphasis on partnership and mutual respect from both camps, highlighting a shared interest in framing their marriages in terms of equality and support rather than domination or control. This contrasted starkly with the viral meme culture, which thrived on reductive humor and caricature. As the days passed, the Sussexes' public relations team doubled down on positive messaging about Meghan and Harry's partnership. New interviews and appearances were carefully scripted to show the couple working as equals and supporting each other through their challenges. A particular interview with a well-known global news outlet featured Meghan speaking candidly about the pressures of public life and the importance of standing by one's partner. While the interview did not mention Rogan or the Macron comparison, it was widely seen as a strategic attempt to reclaim the narrative. At the same time, the Sussexes increased their presence on social media platforms, sharing candid photos and moments that emphasized warmth, love, and partnership. Fans and supporters were encouraged to use hashtags promoting positive images of the couple, subtly countering the viral mini Macron meme with